Welcome back, Sebastian here. It's time for my power rankings for the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. So, number 22, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, a pretty difficult Grand Prix weekend. Qualifies 22nd, dead last. Out-qualified by his teammate Fernando Alonso by about 0.7 of a second. So not great in qualifying. And then in the race, having a pretty nondescript afternoon. And then, of course, kicked off all the chaos that we would see take place in the remaining part of the race by crashing into the final corner. So didn't finish the race. After the Grand Prix in the media pen, he blamed his problems on engine braking. And I know Aston Martin's had some problems throughout the weekend with their car and how their engine connects with their gearbox, but still not great overall for Stroll. Now, number 21, another driver who crashed in the Grand Prix, this time triggering a red flag. I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. Qualified fourth in the Grand Prix, out-qualified by his teammate Lewis Hamilton by 0.07 of a second, so not a massive gap in qualifying, but I did feel like both Ferrari drivers underperformed in qualifying, especially compared to what it seemed like they were able to do in the Friday practice sessions. And then also to top off qualifying, Leclerc crashed at the end of Q3, ruining any chance of him getting pole position. In the Grand Prix, not an amazing Grand Prix, but was right behind his teammate Hamilton. A little bit unlucky with how things played out with the pit stops, but in the end, ends up crashing on the safety car restart, which in some ways is worse than crashing in the Grand Prix. Of course, came on the radio saying, or at least in the media pen after, I don't know if he said it on the radio, but basically came out blaming the brakes for his problems. And so, while the brakes I think are probably part of the issue, I do think it was a bit of a clumsy mistake on Leclerc's part, combined with him already crashing and not completing his final lap in qualifying. Overall, a very, very messy home Grand Prix weekend for Leclerc. Then we get to number 20. Number 20, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg qualified 13th, out-qualified his teammate by 7.6 tenths of a second, which is a massive gap in qualifying, but was not representative of the true pace gap between Hülkenberg and Bortoleto, as Bortoleto ended up crashing towards the end of Q1, and was unable to set a final flying lap, which meant that the gaps are a little bit unrepresentative there. That being said, for Hülkenberg, even though he out-qualified his teammate Bortoleto, I did feel like Hülkenberg did underperform a little bit in qualifying, as the Audis had been looking very, very strong all weekend and looked like they were going to be the best of the rest behind those top four teams. So the fact that neither Audi driver had a great qualifying session, not a great overall for them. Then in the Grand Prix was having this pretty solid race, looked like he might be able to get some points at the restart. Unfortunately, a overly ambitious move at the hairpin took out Sainz. He picked up a 10-second penalty, and that dropped him out of the points. And ends up finishing 13th on the road. So pretty unfortunate for Hülkenberg. If he doesn't go for that move, he might still get points with how some of the other penalties played out, but still not great for Hülkenberg. Number 19, I'm going to go with Sergio Perez. What a weekend it could have been for Perez. He qualified 18th, which on paper is honestly pretty good. He out-qualified Behrman as well in a much faster Haas, although that's partially due to Haas's tire warm-up issues. Then in the Grand Prix, he started in the wrong grid slot. He went into Bortoleto's grid slot. Bortoleto, of course, some kind of issue on the recon lap, ends up having to start from the pit lane. And so when Perez goes to do the formation lap and comes to the grid, he ends up starting in Bortoleto's grid slot, which then forced him to pick up a drive-through penalty for basically being out of position at the start. Then at the restart, was also out of position in his box, so he was in the right box this time, but out of position there and picked up another 10-second penalty. So if Perez could only have figured out how to start races properly, figured out how to do standing starts, he would have had a much better weekend and would have gotten Cadillac's first ever points in F1. But unfortunately, two pretty black and white penalties mean that Perez, unfortunately, two pretty clumsy errors there on his part. Outside of those two penalties, the weekend was excellent from Perez and would have easily been top 4 or 5. I'm putting him down in 19th because of that. In terms of qualifying, he also out-qualified his teammate Bottas by half a second, so not not terrible on that front either. Speaking of Bottas, that's the driver I'm going to put in 18th. So for Bottas, he qualified 20th. Like I said, qualified by half a second by his teammate. And then in the race, ended up retiring relatively early with some kind of mechanical issue. So not a great weekend overall for Bottas. Still been really struggling with one lap pace. Last several races has been out-qualified by Perez by pretty big margins, and it'll be up to him to turn that around in the coming races. I don't think his seat will be under any pressure this year just because of how low Cadillac's expectations are, and there isn't really anyone in the frame right now who could come in and be seen as, a much better option right away. I think Colton Herta has not had a great season in Formula 2, and so I think that's taken a lot of pressure off of both Perez and Bottas to perform immediately. But that being said, there are quite a few drivers who may be out of seats at the end of this year, or who are on the sidelines right now. Someone like Tsunoda, who, if they're interested, might be able to put pressure on Bottas on that Cadillac seat. Now, moving on to 17th, I'm going to go with Gabriel Bortoleto. He started from the pit lane, of course, because of a technical issue, but he did crash in qualifying. A very, very small mistake, just went a little bit too aggressive on the turn-in for the inside curve of the Nouvelle chicane. Other than that, pretty quiet race. Started from the pit lane, like I said, and then ends up finishing in 11th. Not quite a points position, but unfortunately when you crash in qualifying, it's really hard to recover from that. If he had started from his grid slot that he was supposed to, maybe he ends up getting a point here. He was one of the few drivers who did not get a penalty for speeding in the pit lane. So, speaking of speeding in the pit lane, just as a clarification, because of what happened this weekend that caused so many drivers to get 5-second penalties for speeding in the pit lane. If you want to hear the full details, I recommend that you go to one of the motorsports websites and read one of the articles talking about it. The race had a pretty good one, and it basically explained that the way that the FIA were calculating this pit lane speed was not very good, and it was basically in the pre-race driver briefing, drivers have been told they could do something in the pit lane, and it was basically causing them to look like they were going faster in the pit lane than they actually were. So almost all, as far as I know, almost all the drivers who got those penalties weren't actually speeding in the pit lane, but it was a difference between what they were doing and how the FIA was measuring it. So I've decided to just, for all those 5-second penalties, I'm not taking them into account for my power rankings, but unfortunately it did have a pretty big effect on quite a few of the race results from this weekend, which is not a great look for the FIA. Should have mentioned that at the start, but I figured I would mention that now. Number 16, I'm going to go with Oliver Behrman. For Behrman, qualified 19th, out-qualified by his teammate Ocon by 900ths of a second. Out in Q1, not out-qualified by a Cadillac. Not a great result there in the Haas. Haas did say that with how the circumstances were at the end of Q1, red flag because of Bortoleto's crash, it did mean that Haas had a really, really hard time getting their tires up to temperature, and they were kind of just sitting ducks at the end of Q1, which kind of partially explains why both of them were knocked out. That being said, for Behrman, he also had a crash in FP3, so not amazing on that front, and then kind of retired relatively early with some kind of mechanical issue on the car. Maybe could have gotten points otherwise with how crazy this race was, but unfortunately as it was for Behrman, this was a race where he was not really able to take part outside of the opening laps. Number 15, I'm going to go with George Russell. Russell, very, very eventful Grand Prix. Poor qualifying session though, qualified 6th, out-qualified by his teammate Antonelli by almost 0.4 of a second. Then in the Grand Prix, of course, was one of the drivers to pick up the 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. And then a bit of a mistake on Russell's part with communication with the team and what to do with the pit stops meant that Russell ends up not serving the penalty when he comes in to change for tires under the safety car like he should. And then that meant that he ended up with a drive-through penalty on that mini sprint at the end, the 7, 8, 9 lap restart that we had, and that basically dropped him well out of the order, and he ends up finishing 12th. He's actually kind of fortunate to finish 12th, just because a whole bunch of other drivers picked up penalties as well. Not a great Grand Prix in terms of performance from Russell, again, almost entirely down to qualifying, and in a normal Grand Prix weekend at Monaco, qualifying is 95% of the job. This weekend was obviously a little bit different with some of the other things going on. But for Russell, I think a little bit unfortunate to pick up that 5-second penalty, and then of course having to serve the drive-through after that. But nonetheless, not a great performance from Russell. Number 14, I'm going to go with Franco Colapinto. Qualified 14th in the Grand Prix, out-qualified by his teammate by 2.3 tenths of a second, and then in the Grand Prix finished 14th as well. Not a great race for Colapinto, off his teammate Gasly's pace. Was relatively quiet one. The only incident I think Colapinto was involved in was he was in the second part of that chain reaction. If the Hulkenberg-Sainz crash, where Sainz was, I think, trundling around very, very slowly, and the two kind of got caught out, and Colapinto ended up sending Sainz into a spin at Portier. He wasn't penalized for that, I'm assuming, because they decided that given the circumstances of what it was seen as not as entirely Colapinto's fault. So not a great weekend for the Argentine, but hopefully he'll bounce back next time after a couple of really strong weekends in Miami and Canada. Hopefully he can rebound and have a good weekend next time out in Barcelona. Number 13, I'm going to go with Arvid Lindblad, qualified 15th, out-qualified by his teammate Lawson by 7.7 tenths of a second, biggest qualifying gap between teammates this weekend. Not a great result in qualifying. I don't know if he had some kind of issue in qualifying that caused the gap to be so big. But for Lindblad, so far this season qualifying, it's been very inconsistent in terms of one-lap pace. He's been going back and forth between out-qualifying his teammate Lawson by a pretty big margin, and then being out-qualified by likewise pretty big margins. So again, still trying to find a little bit of consistency there in his rookie season. But for Lindblad, he was, I think, a little bit fortunate in the race to get a 6th place finish. So again, a bit of good luck there, but it does kind of make up for the bad luck that he had in Canada, where he was supposed to start in a very good position and then the car failed on the formation lap. For Lindblad, he obviously pressured Alex Albon into a mistake, got past the tie driver, and then of course benefited from the timing of the safety car red flag to pit in that situation, so that he didn't have to lose a whole bunch of positions afterwards. So a little bit lucky for Lindblad. One lap performance maybe a little bit missing from this weekend, but not terrible, I felt, overall. Okay, number 12, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. A little bit unlucky, I felt, this weekend for Sainz. Qualified 12th, out-qualified by his teammate Albon by a very, very small margin, 0.03 of a second. In the race itself, was looking like he was going to score points, then got tagged by Nico Hulkenberg, got tagged a second time by Colapinto, and his race was over. So overall, not a terrible Grand Prix for Sainz. Could have easily gotten points, just a little bit fractionally slower than his teammate Albon in qualifying, and then of course didn't finish the race, but not his fault for that. So for me, I'm going to put Sainz in 12th. Now moving into 11th, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. For Norris, he was out-qualified by his teammate Oscar Piastri by 1.4 tenths of a second. Qualified 8th, and should have qualified somewhere in the top 5 or 6 positions, but messed up his final lap in qualifying, so a bit of a mistake there. Then in the race, retired midway through with some kind of mechanical issue when he was running behind Gasly and his teammate Piastri. Could have easily have gotten a top 5-6 finish if his car had allowed him to. And for his first win of his career in Miami 2024, of course, the joke running around the internet was Lando no wins, and now we're in the Lando no luck era, it seems, with back-to-back mechanical retirements for Norris. So for Norris, not a terrible weekend, but not a particularly good one either. Number 10, I'm going to go with Isaac Hadjar, his first podium at Red Bull, and the first time a Red Bull driver not named Max Verstappen has gotten a podium since, I want to say, very, very early in 2024. I think maybe China. One of the earlier races might have been Baku, although I think Baku 24 was in the fall, so it wouldn't have been Baku. But nonetheless, it's been almost 2 years since a Red Bull driver not named Max Verstappen has been on the podium, so good result there, especially since Hadjar was struggling with some kind of engine problem that meant that he didn't quite have the power on the straights. Wouldn't be the first time that Red Bull driver got a decent result after having engine problems during the race. Qualified 5th, so a little bit of an underperformance in terms of one lap pace. Out-qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by about 3.5 tenths of a second. So still a bit of a deficit there in one lap pace. Again, that's to be expected, but I thought I had a pretty solid weekend given the circumstances, and finishing third helped a little bit by the chaos going on around him, but nonetheless kept it out of the wall, didn't pick up any penalties, and so I think an okay result for Hadjar. So I think 10th is a good spot on my power rankings. Number 9, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso. Somehow, some way, Alonso picked up a 10th place finish in the Aston Martin, picks up Aston's first points of the season, and very likely their only points of the season. That being said, it wasn't a perfect weekend for Alonso, so unfortunately doesn't end up with the top 3 or 4 spot that he probably could have gotten with a perfectly clean weekend. For Alonso, he qualified 21st, out-qualified Stroll by 7/10 of a second, so very good on that front. Did have that crash in free practice, shunted himself into the wall, which again is part of the reason why I'm not putting him higher. But in the Grand Prix itself, had a pretty quiet weekend, and of course benefited quite a lot from the carnage chaos going on around him to inherit that 10th place after Perez's Cadillac got a penalty, after Hulkenberg got a penalty, after Russell had to serve his drive-through penalty as well. Alright, number 8, I'm going to go with Alex Albon, qualified 11th, out-qualified his teammate Sainz by 0.03 of a second, so finally won his first qualifying head-to-head matchup of the season in terms of Grand Prix qualifying. Pretty solid Grand Prix overall. Did have one small mistake at the Nouvelle chicane, which allowed Lindblad to get past, and that of course eventually led Lindblad to pit in favorable circumstances and pick up that 6th place finish. But nonetheless, for Albon, not a terrible result, gets his best finish in the season, picks up 4 valuable points. For Williams, I thought overall had a pretty solid weekend. Number 7, I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri, qualified 7th, out-qualified his teammate Lando Norris by 1/10 of a second or so, and then in the Grand Prix finished 4th in the Grand Prix. Could have gone a podium if Hadjar had actually gotten a penalty for the perceived red flag infringement. Didn't happen. So Piastri ends up 4th on the road. Did get a 5-second penalty, but like I said, I'm not really taking that into consideration for these power rankings just because of how many there were and because of the circumstances. But for Piastri, pretty solid weekend overall. I did feel like underperformed a little bit in qualifying. Norris was on pace to out-qualify him. If he hadn't messed up that last lap, did generally look the more comfortable of the 2 drivers in qualifying over the course of the weekend, but still put the lap in when it counted and came home to a pretty quiet 4th place finish, so I think decent result for the Australian. Number 6, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon, qualified 17th, out-qualified his teammate Oliver Behrman by 0.09 of a second. Relatively quiet Grand Prix, not a lot I can say, but did, of course, keep it clean when others certainly didn't, and ends up finishing 9th in the Grand Prix, picked up 2 points, and that's his best finish of the season. Number 5, I'm going to go with Liam Lawson, qualified 10th, very good job in qualifying, I felt, to get kind of second in the second-tier group after the top 4 teams. Out-qualified his teammate Lindblad by 7.7 of a second, and then in the Grand Prix had a pretty solid result. Kept it clean, was generally towards the front of that midfield group, a little bit behind Gasly, obviously, over the course of the weekend, and of course a little bit fortunate with all the penalties and stuff to basically move his way up to 5th, which I do believe is either his career best Grand Prix finish or it's tied with his career best Grand Prix finish. So overall, really good weekend for Lawson. Now, number 4, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly. What could have been for Gasly without those penalties ends up with 10 seconds in penalties total for speeding in the pit lane, which we now know was caused by a measurement error, effectively by the FIA. Qualified 9th, best of the rest. Out-qualified his teammate Carl Pinto by 2.3 of a second. Then in the race, unfortunately, with how he picked up those penalties, he ends up getting that 10 seconds added to his race time at the end of the session, which dropped him from a podium position in 3rd all the way down to 7th, I believe. So still picks up 6 valuable points, which in a normal Grand Prix weekend would have been a fantastic result. Could have been a podium, so a bit unfortunate that he doesn't get that. Alpine are challenging the results in the Grand Prix, and I guess if they can show that the car was not above 60 kilometers an hour in the pit lane from GPS data on the car, it will be interesting to see if he can get those penalties revoked. Unlike most of the drivers who served their penalties during the Grand Prix, Gasly had his added to the end of his Grand Prix time. So in theory, it's much easier to actually remove those 10 seconds in penalty and put him back on the podium than it is for any of the other drivers. Because of course, once you serve the penalty in race, you can't get that penalty removed, unlike something post race. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm not super confident that he'll get the podium back, just because I think it would make the FIA know that it would make them look really stupid if they basically rescinded the penalty, and they would have to admit that they made a mistake, which they clearly did in this circumstance. Now, number 3, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. Very good weekend for the British driver. Qualified third, out-qualified his teammate Charles Leclerc by 700ths of a second. I felt did underperform slightly in qualifying, and that, of course, is a big difference between him and the driver who I put in second. Number 1, I don't think anyone's going to doubt who the driver first is. But for Hamilton, very, very good weekend overall. So qualifying, I felt a little bit less than what the maximum what he could have gotten out of the car. But in the Grand Prix, I thought he was generally excellent. Of course, did pick up the 5-second penalty, but so did basically half the grid. Ends up finishing second on the road, of course, and so very, very good job for Hamilton overall. Number 2, I am going to go with Max Verstappen. Qualified second, ill-qualified his teammate Hadjar by 3.4 tenths of a second. And then in the Grand Prix, of course, his engine failed. So unfortunately, what was an amazing qualifying result for Verstappen, very, very close between himself and Antonelli. He's not able to do anything with it as his engine basically gave up on him just as the race was starting. So very unfortunate for Verstappen, very unlucky. I don't think he could have gotten the win here. I think the only way he could have gotten the win was if he had a much better start than Antonelli, or if he somehow got past Antonelli in the pit stops. But given the issues Hadjar was having, I felt, the tire wear on the Red Bull was not amazing today. And given how much of an advantage Antonelli had over the Ferraris, who were perceived as the best team this weekend, I think it would have been very, very difficult for anyone to be anywhere close to the driver number 1, who of course is Kimi Antonelli. Picks up his first career Grand Slam, the youngest driver to ever get a Grand Slam as well. And this incredible run that Antonelli's been on since China just continues to build and build. And as he does that, seems to break new records every Grand Prix weekend. He's now won 5 consecutive Grand Prix, which is half of Max Verstappen's F1 record, 10, and of course equals Hamilton's best ever result from his career, which is also 5. For Antonelli, just an amazing Grand Prix weekend, kept it together, kept it cool on the restarts. Never really looked any doubt that Antonelli was going to win this Grand Prix. So an excellent result for him, and he is number 1 on my power rankings for the first time this year, and thoroughly deserves it. So that's all for my power rankings for the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.